Picture this. You've got a highly intelligent, incredibly ambitious professional. They're putting in the long hours, fiercely dedicated to their career. But behind the scenes, they're secretly drowning in workplace friction. Every single day feels like an absolute uphill battle, and they genuinely cannot figure out why.
Let's look at what's actually happening to them. They're spending hours, literally hours, perfecting the absolute simplest of tasks, just completely draining their own time. When a colleague pitches a totally terrible idea, they just nod along, desperate to avoid disagreement because they need that approval. They're hoarding important work, stubbornly juggling everything themselves, refusing to delegate. And then, when their team inevitably reacts with frustration or annoyance, they're just baffled. They have no idea what went wrong.
Then, one day, they sit down for a performance review. A manager looks them dead in the eye and drops a piece of unexpected feedback. They say, "The way I see myself may not be the way other people experience me." Wow, it is a massive wake-up call. That one sentence completely shatters their worldview, because it's the exact moment they realize their good intentions are completely missing the mark when it comes to their actual impact.
Which brings us right to you. How well do you really know yourself? Because here's the truth. If we want to overcome this kind of day-to-day professional friction, we have to master the foundational skill that powers every single other skill. We have to build self-awareness. So let's break down the 5 keys to doing exactly that. Okay, let's dive into this. Key number 1, know your natural strengths.
This right here is a massive hurdle for so many professionals. You have to learn how to differentiate between what you're just capable of doing and what actually fuels you. For instance, you might be fantastic at writing reports, right? But the process, it leaves you completely exhausted. It totally drains your energy. But flip that around. Maybe when you facilitate meetings, it just flows. It comes naturally, you feel totally energized, you get strong results, and your colleagues are constantly praising you for it. That rush of energy is the ultimate clue. It tells you that facilitation, not report writing, is your true natural strength.
That brings us to our second key. Discover the strengths you don't even know you have.
You know, sometimes our greatest abilities are hiding right under our noses. They're tucked away in tasks we actively avoid, things we haven't even tried yet, or honestly things we find so incredibly easy we just mistakenly assume everyone else can do them. Picture an employee who absolutely dreads chaotic, tense project alignment meetings. One day, they are forced to step up and run one. But, plot twist, they end up untangling the chaos flawlessly, guiding 2 furious colleagues right to a handshake. They walk out completely stunned. They just discovered a rare, hidden talent for organizing debate and driving consensus that they literally never knew they possessed.
And you can see how this happens in a very clear sequence. Stepping out of your comfort zone creates a new experience, that experience leads to a discovery, and that discovery ultimately builds your self-awareness. You simply can't figure these things out just by sitting alone in a room thinking about them. You've got to push yourself into new experiences to unlock that awareness.
All right, moving on to our third key, recognize your biases.
We all love to think we're perfectly objective, right? But the reality is, our backgrounds, our assumptions, and our past experiences unconsciously warp how we judge the people we work with every single day. Think about a time you assumed a quiet, reserved colleague sitting in the back of a workshop had absolutely nothing to contribute. You just naturally wrote them off. But then, that exact same person suddenly stands up, walks to the whiteboard, and flawlessly maps out the ultimate solution to the biggest problem your team is facing. Everyone is just stunned. That initial assumption you made, that was a bias in action.
Let's see how this builds. Because to beat this, you need a mental framework. Whenever you catch a biased thought, a quick assumption, you must actively pause. Just hit the brakes. Then question its validity. Ask yourself, why do I actually think they have nothing to contribute? This deliberate questioning unlocks a brand new, accurate perspective, and it keeps you from making some really costly professional errors.
Now for the fourth key, and honestly, this one is an absolute game changer. Discover your iceberg beliefs.
Iceberg beliefs are these deeply ingrained childhood rules about how the world, quote-unquote, should operate. And this brilliantly illustrates how it works. Above the water, you have your visible behavior. That's what your colleagues see every day. But down below the water, that's where you find these massive, hidden beliefs. They're completely out of sight, but they are what unconsciously steer the ship and drive almost all of our daily professional actions. Let's look at 3 specific types.
First up is the achievement iceberg belief. The hidden rule down below is, it has to be perfect. So what does that look like above the water? It looks like an employee who repeatedly misses critical deadlines. To the team, they just look disorganized or maybe a bit slow. But below the surface, the core problem is entirely different. The problem is that their work is simply never deemed good enough in their own eyes.
Next, we have the acceptance iceberg belief. Here, the hidden rule is, I must avoid conflict. In the workplace, you might see an employee who knows a stakeholder's request is completely unrealistic. They know it's going to tank the project. But because they are so terrified of losing approval or causing any friction, they refuse to challenge it. So the visible behavior is poor planning, but the hidden belief is a desperate need for acceptance.
The third one is the control iceberg belief. The hidden rule: if I want it done correctly, I must do it myself. Above the surface, we see a professional who absolutely refuses to delegate anything, ultimately crashing into severe burnout and total overload. It looks like a classic time management problem, right? But it's actually driven by a deep fear of vulnerability and a loss of control. You have to surface these hidden beliefs if you ever want to actually change the behavior.
Which brings us to our fifth and final key: use feedback as fuel.
Here's the thing. We all eventually hit a hard wall with self-reflection. You simply cannot see your own blind spots. It's impossible, which means we have to rely on other people. So the crucial point here is understanding the massive difference in the types of feedback we receive. Evaluative feedback simply tells us how we're performing against expectations. It just grades us. But developmental feedback, that is what actively helps us improve. It actually builds our skills. We need to be hunting for developmental feedback.
The problem is, it is way too easy to fall into the terrible habit of asking a vague question like, "Hey, do you have any feedback?" Instead, try using this highly specific script. When I facilitate stakeholder meetings, what is one thing I could do differently to make them more effective? Do you see the difference? This forces the other person to give you actionable, developmental advice that you can actually use.
And once you ask, you want to follow this simple but incredibly powerful 5-step loop. Ask specifically, listen without interrupting, clarify to make sure you understand the exact context, reflect on it alone so you don't get defensive in the heat of the moment, and finally, apply the lesson. This is exactly how you process hard truths and turn them into pure professional fuel. Finally, let's look at the self-awareness transformation.
Let's jump back to that highly intelligent but struggling professional from our opening story. Take a look at them now. They are completely relaxed. They're handing off tasks with a genuine smile. They're engaging in healthy debate without panicking about approval. And they're actually celebrating wins with their team. By surfacing their iceberg beliefs and aggressively seeking developmental feedback, they completely change their behaviors, their relationships, and ultimately their performance. Now, what's really interesting about this is how it acts as a complete professional blueprint. Think of the sequence we just covered. You start by knowing your natural strengths. You push into new experiences to discover blind spots. You pause to challenge your biases. You surface those hidden iceberg beliefs, and you constantly seek developmental feedback. The result of all that? Better choices, better relationships, and massively better performance. We'll wrap up this explainer by leaving you with this one thought. Ask yourself right now, what is one thing about yourself that other people can see, but you haven't discovered yet?